When I was 10, the only thing I had to learn English was a little cassette tape. It was a recording of a national college student English public speaking competition, where everybody was talking about the big topics like world politics, like China's entry to WTO, that sort of things. Things I didn't understand as a boy, not even in Chinese. But the only thing on the tape that was truly interesting for me was a contestant's story about his lost cat, Libby. And I remember he started his speech like this. I remember the day I lost my cat, Libby, as if it were yesterday. I didn't understand every word of it, but I got the message. That's why I was immediately attracted to it. So I just kept listening to that story again and again and again and again. And now let's fast forward many years. Now I was in secondary school. One day, my English teacher asked me to stand up and tell everybody an interesting story. I was completely caught off guard because, I was sleeping. So I had no choice but to rephrase and tell that Libby story in my own words. I remember I started my speech like this. I remember the day I lost my cat Libby as if it were yesterday. And by the time I finished my story, I could tell everybody in the room was deeply impressed and even moved, including my teacher, who'd been waiting for me to make a fool of myself. She said, "That was a great story, and I didn't expect any of you to use subjunctive quite like that. You're amazing. Go apply yourself. Don't sleep anymore. You can be an interpreter one day." And I was like, what subjunctive? What interpreter? It turned out what I thought was only one simple word, as if it were actually 4 words. But I knew perfectly well what they meant and how to use them. So that was a revelation for me. I thought to myself, okay, I think we've just cracked the code. That's the way to learn English. So now, many years later, here I am, an interpreter sharing with you my principles and my methods to complement your traditional language teaching you received back at school. Sorry, there was a long build-up, but before you lose your patience, allow me to quickly summarize today's main points in just one sentence. You see, when we're learning a new language, it's very important for us to first spend most time on interesting input, and second, to adopt a top-down approach, so that we'll never miss the forest for the trees. Again, getting more exposure and adopting a top-down mindset, as opposed to a bottom-up mindset, which is exactly how we were taught back in school. You see, the traditional language teaching method is one that's built around the so-called skill-building hypothesis. For example, you have to accumulate loads of vocabulary or to throw yourself into endless grammar drills before you can finally understand the message in reading and in listening. And in turn, you use those skills in reading and listening to learn more. Well, it sounds like a good plan though, because you take one step at a time and you can have a very good solid foundation before you move on to the next stage. However, this method in reality just doesn't work because it's the wrong way around. We don't break a language down and develop certain skills by studying each and every component individually, and then you go back and take those skills to learn the language itself. It's ridiculous. We didn't learn Chinese this way, did we? Then how do we learn it? Or should we ask, how do we learn languages really?
We acquire language in one way and only one way, when we get comprehensible input in a low anxiety environment.
And that's exactly how I learned, how I understood that lost cat story. And now much of what I said could be explained by the so-called comprehensible input hypothesis proposed by Professor Krashen you just saw there. And that's a very important topic, and I'll make another video about it. But all you have to know now, at the moment, is that we don't learn languages. We acquire them naturally by immersing ourselves in interesting content in that target language. But where does the top-down part come from? You see, the bottom-up approach alone doesn't work, but it gives you a very good foundation. So, it's best accompanied by a method that goes the other direction. So the top-down direction can make sure you can always see the big picture. You can always see what's more important for you at the moment without getting too fixated on, those small details in classroom. Like, is it I am, or I is, or I are? I'm pretty sure if you can spend more time on interesting content than on a grammar book, you can pick it up yourself without even learning it, don't you think? Okay, I know. I've been very abstract and very elusive. You may think I'm just full of shit, or I just repeat what other people say in a different way. Trust me, it's not the case. So now let me give you something more concrete. And I'll demonstrate how we can apply these two principles in different areas of your study. First, let's start with pronunciation. You see, the bottom-up approach requires us starting with the phonetic alphabet, and then words, and then phrases, and perhaps, in the end, sentences. Sounds like a good plan. But let's say if you're listening to a conversation in English where two people were speaking at their full-blown speed, you can't understand a word. What you hear is not the phonetics, unfortunately, but the melody and rhythm of the language. And like we talked about in my previous video, the rhythm of the language is largely determined by the stresses, or the stresses in those unstressed words. The musicality, however, is determined mainly by the intonation, not pronunciation. That is to say, if you want to improve your overall pronunciation in the quickest way, then perhaps it's the intonation, not the pronunciation, that you want to focus on. And unfortunately, in our bottom-up method, in our traditional language teaching methods, we nearly always neglect intonation. So, what do? Check this out. This is a famous polyglot, Luca Lamberiero, demonstrating his methods for learning intonation. And all you need is a piece of recording, is transcript, and a pen.
Ghosts and goblins. October 31st is a night for fun and fright. Children of...
So this is the first sentence where I've marked the intonation going up. October 31st, I'm introducing the subject. Then I'm going up for fun because I haven't finished yet, so my tone goes up. And then the sentence falls on fright because I have concluded saying the sentence itself. So I just stopped the recording there. It was really easy to do with my left hand. And then with my right hand, I'm just marking the text phonetically with this pencil. Very easy and straightforward to do.
And by the time you finish marking the whole article with arrows, you'll end up with a piece of sheet music. And all you have to do now, if you want to practice intonation, is to sing with it, like this.
Ghosts and goblins. October 31st is a night for fun and fright. Children of all ages dress up in costumes. There are little girls who dress up as fairies, princesses, ballerinas, and the like.
You get the idea. Now, in my Lost Cat story, like I mentioned, I didn't even know that As If It Were contained 4 words rather than 1. So you can see there's a very thin line between syllables and words. And that made me realize it's very important for us to master connected speech. So when you're doing this listening while marking thing, please make sure you also highlight every stressed word in every sentence, and also stress those places where the original speaker connects his words together. That way, when you're doing the imitation, you know when to stress and how to do those connected speech properly. Now, still on fluency, many people I know are highly proficient in English, they could write like Shakespeare, but when they speak, they get stuck all the time. For example, they would say things like, I remember the day I lost my cat as if it were yesterday. Something like that. You can see they're struggling, but perfect grammar, perfect word choice, it's just not very fluent. They're actually the typical end products of those of that bottom-up approach or the traditional language teaching approach, because they studied every component of the language individually, and that's why they have a hard time putting together everything into one sentence. If you really love studying something, then my suggestion would be start studying and collecting sentence structures. For example, for a sentence like, I remember something as if it were yesterday, you can see that as one unit and see this whole sentence as a long word and memorize this word. Just stop memorizing individual words or phrases. They're good, but they're not nearly as efficient as memorizing sentence structures. Because the next time you want to express a similar thought, if you have a sentence structure already in mind, you don't have to think. It just flows out very naturally, very automatically. But it's still the second best solution for me. The best solution to fluency, for me, still comes from more exposure. You want to read more, you want to listen to more things. You want to see how an author developed his idea into an entire paragraph. Or if you're listening to a speaker addressing an audience, then you want to see how he progresses from idea A to idea B. So, simply put, why he always has something to say. That's the core to fluency, isn't it? So you want to know why he always has something to say and why he can associate sentence A to sentence B, how he developed his idea. And that will fix the root cause of your fluency issue. And this part comes in really handy for people like us, interpreters. See, when we're doing simultaneous interpreting, it's very important for us to anticipate what's going to happen next. Let's say a speaker says, although blah 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 blah. Then what do? We normally would wait. We wouldn't just rush to say, 虽然如何如何. No, we will wait because we know very clearly the 但是 part will come in a second. And the 但是 part is nearly always more important than the although part. So we're willing to sacrifice our speed to have more processing capability to make sure we can process the 但是 bit correctly and interpret it, because that part can't go wrong. And that brings us to my next application on grammar, our Chinese students' all-time favorite. I remember when I was a secondary school student, my classmates always turned every grammar question into a math problem. And they studied A, B, C, D very carefully before they did lots of calculations, which I don't understand, and finally arrived to their conclusions. But more often than not, their conclusions were wrong. So how did it happen? I say, stop analyzing. Stop trying to make sense of grammar by applying your own knowledge, and stop asking why. Why we need a past tense in our subjunctive. How would I know why? This is not my language, this is not your language, so we're bound to have lots of things we don't understand. So just shut up and get used to it. That's my advice, and it always works. And at the end of the day, it's the story, the interesting content that we're meant to focus on, not the language structure. So here, there's a very interesting story from the legendary polyglot Steve Kaufman.
Because every language does things differently. And I often quote the example, when I started learning Chinese, I had another Canadian diplomat learning with me. And when he found out that in Chinese, to say, are you going? They say, you go not go. 你去不去? You not go not go. And his reaction was, is that ever stupid? Now, he's not going to learn, right? He's not going to learn. So
exactly. So stop judging a language and stop trying to make sense of a language by applying your own values, your own knowledge or past experience. It never works like that. I know you may ask, but I need to know why. But I need to understand it to pass my exam. I need to understand it, otherwise I will make tons of mistakes. True. But if you're serious about learning a language, rather than, passing a few tests, then you should be very tolerant of your mistakes. I know the traditional language teaching methods penalize or even stigmatize mistakes, but you should be very tolerant of your mistakes because your grammatical accuracy will only come over time, and it will only come with natural acquisition of your language. That is, you need to read more, to listen more. So, according to Professor Krashen's input hypothesis, grammar can very much take care of itself during the process. So trust me, all you need to do now is to listen more, read more. Through multiple repetitions, through more exposure, your grammatical accuracy will come over time. Well, I gather by now this video must have been incredibly long already, so let me be very brief in my last application, vocabulary. So how do we apply this top-down principle on vocabulary? Well, the principle tells us to be very efficient and to stay focused on the big picture. So let's not forget the 80-20 rule. 20% of the input can give you 80% of the coverage. So your job as a language learner is to find the 20% core input, and just never gets easier in this day and age. All you have to do is to type in word frequency list in Google.
In English, 1,000 words covers 85% of anything you're ever going to say in daily communication. 3,000 words gives you 98% of anything you're going to say in daily conversation. You got 3,000 words, you're speaking the language. The rest is icing on the cake.
Exactly. A full-scale dictionary may contain over 500,000 entries, but the explanations of those words are written by no more than 3,000 to 5,000 words, and those are the so-called keywords. Those are the most frequently used words. In other words, if you can turn those 5,000 most frequently commonly used words into your active words, then, theoretically speaking, you can say anything in that language. But here's the catch. Given you're using very simple language, you also need to master the art of simplification. And let's hear what the polyglot Lydia has to say on this point.
When I was learning Spanish, I was just at the beginning, maybe A1, A2 probably. And I was out with some friends, Spanish-speaking friends, Erasmus students here in Bratislava, and we were doing some shopping, etc. And afterwards, they said they were hungry. So they asked me, is there any restaurants out there? And I was trying to explain to them in Spanish, my very, very limited Spanish, that yeah, there is a shopping center nearby and there is a food court that we can all go to and we can pick several types of restaurants, several types of cuisines, and have a good meal. But with my very limited Spanish, all I said was, en esa casa hay mucha comida. There's a lot of food in that house. And it worked.
Let's say your Chinese level is here and your English level is here. If you want to do translation from Chinese to English, which I don't recommend, stop translating in your mind. But if you really want to do that, you don't want to lift your English level up here immediately. You can't do that. Instead, you want to bring down your Chinese level down here so that you can translate. So just remember the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. And now it's time to wrap up this excruciatingly long video. Oh, Jesus, I hardly know where to begin. The first principle is that you need to spend more time on interesting content, because getting more exposure can enable you to see how the language is supposed to be spoken in real life in this context. While the second principle, the top-down approach, can make sure you can always stay focused on the big picture, and you can be very efficient in your learning process so that you will never miss the forest for the trees. It's just that simple. I don't know why it took me so long. Anyway, that's it. So please let me know what you think about today's episode. And more importantly, please don't forget to subscribe and 一键三连. Oh, let me know in the comment box below if you love watching long videos like this, because that will determine if I will continue to do so or not. And that's it. Until next time, see ya.